Hello and welcome to episode 1 of my Shell by Example series. So if you missed the introduction episode to this series, be sure to click up here to go ahead and watch that to get caught up. So in that episode, we discussed why the shell is important, what our general configuration is going to look like for this series, and we displayed Hello World to the screen just to give us a start in the terminal. So in this episode, we're going to navigate around our file system and learn about that. So your computer hard drive is laid out in like a hierarchical fashion. So it has directories that contain either other directories or files. So we can think of the location of each file or directory according to which directories it's in. So to go ahead and think of that, the root of our file system, or the top level thing in it, is called slash, and it contains everything else. So let's say we had a file called logo.png, and that was inside of a directory called pictures, and that pictures directory was inside of a directory called media, and that was inside our root directory. So then that logo.png picture file would be located at something that looks like slash media slash pictures slash logo.png. So that would be its full path. The path is what it's called. So in terms of basic commands now that we understand how it works, we can start interacting with it. So the first thing that we can do when we're in our shell is whenever we're in our shell, we are at some location in our file system. So to find out what location that is in, we can use the pwd command. So pwd stands for print working directory. And when we run pwd, we will see the full path to wherever we are currently in our shell, starting from that root directory of slash. So if we go ahead and run that, you'll see here, I get /users/Aiden. You'll get something else when you run it, obviously, unless your user account also happens to be Aiden. But yeah, so this right here is called my home directory. So the home directory is generally where you will start in your terminal when you first start it up, and it's where all of your personal documents and files and things like that belong to your user account will generally be located. So you can see here that's represented here with this little home icon, but it also has this little tilde, and tilde is a very easy way that we can represent our home directory when we're talking about it in our shell. So that will go to your home directory no matter what user you are, so you don't need to type in the full thing with your username. So now that we can see where we are, it's important that we learn how to reference where we are. So there are two important things that we're going to go over right now, because obviously it would be cumbersome to always use the full path to absolutely everything we're talking about. So to talk about things relative to where we are, there are two important things to know. So there's dot, and dot is a shortcut to wherever we are. So that is going to, in this case, dot would be referring to /users/Aiden, and dot represents our parent directory. So in this case, that would be representing users, because that's the thing one level up from where we are. So we can refer to files from our current directory by just writing out their names normally without any sort of thing appending them, or we can write // with their name, and that will also represent things in our current directory. So now we can go ahead and talk about how to view the other things that are next to us in that file system. So to do this, we can use the ls command. So ls is short for list. And it lists all of the files that are in a directory. If we run it with no arguments, like this, then it will just go ahead and list out all of the different folders that are inside of the current directory that we are in. So this is going to give us a list of all of the things in /users/Aiden. So we can also go ahead and pass it the name of a file. So we can go, or the name of a directory rather. So here, for instance, we can go ahead and see, okay, we have that projects thing. So if we want to list out the things that are in projects, we can do ls./projects. So that is then going to show us the different things that are in my projects directory. So if we go ahead and do that, there are a bunch of ways to do that. So now I'm going to take a quick tangent to talk about flags, the man command, and just generally how to get help on the terminal. So ls is great on its own, but there's a lot more that we can do with it. So this leads us into flags. So flags are options that you can pass to a command to alter its behavior. They're generally prefixed by either a slash if it's a single character long, or 2 slashes if they're longer. That's the normal form. And some examples of flags that we can pass to ls are ls-a. So if we run ls-a in here, you will see we have a bunch of other files that are showing up. So the reason these weren't showing up before is these are hidden files, which you can see because their name starts with a dot. So these aren't normally going to show up unless you run ls with -a or -all, which is going to include hidden files. So there's another option that we can use called -l. So -l is long, and it will show you much more detailed information about all of the folders in your directory. We'll get into what these mean specifically later in terms of a lot of the things that you see on the screen now, so don't worry about that. But this, you can see, is giving us a lot of information. And whenever we're using flags, we can also chain flags by just including them after one dash. So we can just do ls-al. We don't have to do -a-l, run that, and it will give us long output for all of the files in our home directory. So this is great to know, these specific options for ls, but it would be really annoying if you had to remember a bunch of different options for every command you want to use. And this is where the man command comes in. So man is short for manual, and it provides a manual for any command you give it, granted that whoever wrote the program that you're trying to get the manual for actually wrote a manual and included it correctly with the thing you're running. So if we go ahead and run man ls, you can see we get a lot of information about what the ls command is, what it does, a quick synopsis of how to use it, a description of the command, and you can see here, if I just go ahead and make my view a little bit smaller so it actually fits correctly. It does not want to play nice right now. There we go. You can see a bunch of different options. So these are the things that we were talking about before, and this just describes all the different sort of options you can pass to ls. You can see there are tons of ones that we didn't even talk about, because it would just be ridiculous to talk about this many options for a bunch of different commands. So just a quick thing about this viewer that we're in right now. So man by default will use the less viewer, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. But on a basic level, to navigate around it, you're going to use the arrow keys to go up and down, and you're going to use Q to quit when you're ready to quit. So if we just hit Q, we go right back out of that command. So if you want a more in-depth thing about the controls of less, you can go ahead and actually run man on less and then see a bunch of things about it. So now that that quick tangent with regard to flags and how to use them is over, we can move into the next commands that we need for navigating our file system. And we're going to start with cd. So cd is short for change directory. And to use cd, we simply give it the path to a directory, either relative to where we are or absolutely, and it will change our working directory to that path if it exists. So I have some example files for this thing, so we can go ahead and see that. I put them in, we are in our user thing, so we can just go to projects because we saw that that was in there. So if we just go to projects/shellx, and you can see there, I didn't have to type everything, because if you type enough of the name of something for it to be unique compared to everything else, you can go ahead and hit tab, and it will actually complete the string to whatever is actually in your file system, or is a command that exists, or whatever else you have completions for you. So now we can see we're in our projects/shellx thing. So we could also, if we're in there, go ahead and move out of it with cd ... because remember, we can use any sort of form like that. But let's say we wanted to go something completely different, not even our home directory. We could do a full path by doing cd/, let's see what's in here. We could go to bin. And if we go ahead and ls in here, we can see a bunch of the commands that ship with our system. So that's another interesting option you can do, is by doing direct things with cd. So now if we want to go back to the thing in our home directory, we can use that tilde shortcut I showed you before, go back to projects, shellx, and that should give you a pretty good basic idea of how to use cd. So now that we have a good idea of how to actually move around and inspect our file system, we're going to talk about inspecting the actual files in our file system. So there are a lot of ways to view the contents of files, like the less viewer that we saw earlier, but the most basic thing for text files is the cat command, which comes from its name, the other use of it, which is for concatenating files together. So if we just run cat and then the path to a file, for example, I have a media folder in this example thing with texts, and I just have some lorem ipsum text in there. You can see it output all of the contents of that file to our terminal. So that will give us everything like that. There are a bunch of other viewers as well. There are a bunch of different ways to interact with different file types, for instance. For example, if you're using macOS, this is not a thing with Linux. You can simply type open and then the path to anything, and it will open it in the default app for that file type. So one last command that we're going to use is the file command. So the file command is useful for inspecting the type of a file. So if we go ahead and run file, let's see what's in here. We have media. Let's do one of our pictures. So if we run file on that, we'll get a bunch of information on it. You can see it's a JPEG image. It has all this other like content about it and a bunch of information. And file will give this sort of thing for pretty much any file type. So we can go ahead and run file on other things here. What do we have? We have executables. So if we go ahead and run that on that, we'll see, okay, this is an executable right here, and it gives us some information about it and what it was compiled for. So that is the file command. It essentially tells you what kind of file you're pointing it at. And now that we have a good idea of how to inspect and move around our file system, we're ready to start interacting with files and directories. So that's what we're going to get started on in the next episode, where we will learn how to create, edit, and delete both files and directories. So that's going to be all for today. Drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to get subscribed so you don't miss any future episodes of this series. As the series progresses, I will be adding everything to a playlist, which should be linked right about here. So be sure to stay tuned with that. Follow that playlist for all of the other shell things. Share this video with any of your friends who also might want to learn how to use a shell. Thank you, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye.